when three teenage boys from different corners of Italy stepped onto the stage of Ti lascio una canzone in 2009, no one could have predicted that their voices would resurrect a dying art form and captivate millions across 5 continents. Piero Baroni, Ignazio Boschetto, and Gianluca Ginobili were just 14 and 15 years old, their faces still round with youth, their formal wear slightly too large for their growing frames. Yet when they opened their mouths and began to sing, something extraordinary happened. The studio audience fell silent. Hardened music industry veterans leaned forward in their seats. And at home, viewers across Italy stopped whatever they were doing to listen. What emerged from those 3 young voices wasn't the pop confection that dominated the airwaves in 2009. It wasn't the auto-tuned, electronically processed sound that had become synonymous with teen stardom. Instead, it was something ancient and powerful, a sound that seemed to carry within it the ghosts of Caruso and Pavarotti, of centuries of Italian musical tradition compressed into 3 adolescent bodies who could barely drive a car. The harmonies they created together possessed a quality that musicologists struggle to define, a blend so seamless that it became nearly impossible to distinguish where one voice ended and another began. The truth behind those harmonies, however, is far more complex and human than the seemingly effortless perfection they project on stage. Behind the flawless performances lies a story of relentless sacrifice, creative tension, and the peculiar burden of being chosen to carry forward a musical legacy that most young people in Italy had already abandoned. Piero Baroni grew up in Naro, a small town in Sicily where the unemployment rate hovered around 30%, and where dreams of musical stardom seemed as distant as the moon. His family ran a small market, and money was perpetually tight. His mother, Eleonora, recognized something special in her son's voice when he was still a toddler, the way he would hum along to the old records she played while cleaning the house. But nurturing that talent required resources they didn't have. Voice lessons were expensive. Travel to auditions in larger cities meant lost workdays and fuel costs that strained an already tight family budget. What few people know is that Piero's early vocal training came not from prestigious conservatories, but from his local church choir director, an elderly man who had studied opera decades earlier but had returned to Naro after his own performing career never materialized. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, young Piero would walk to the church for lessons. Payment negotiated down to whatever the Barone family could afford that month. Sometimes money, sometimes produce from the market, sometimes just a promise. The director, whose name Piero still mentions with reverence in Italian interviews, though it rarely makes it into English translations, taught him not just how to sing, but why to sing, instilling in him the idea that the voice was an instrument of connection, a way to touch something sacred in other people. Ignazio Boschetto's path was different, but no less challenging. Born in Bologna to a Sicilian family, he spent his early childhood navigating 2 worlds. His family eventually moved back to Sicily, to Marsala, where the smell of the fortified wine production that gave the town its fame mingled with sea salt in the air. Ignazio's voice was discovered almost by accident at a local festival where he was essentially volunteered to perform by his mother. He was 11 years old and terrified, but when he began to sing, the crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. What the polished press releases don't mention is that Ignazio struggled profoundly with stage fright in those early years. Before performances, he would become physically ill, sometimes vomiting from anxiety. His parents seriously questioned whether pushing him toward a singing career was the right choice for a child who experienced such distress. But there was something in Ignazio that was stronger than his fear, a compulsion toward music that he couldn't ignore, even when his body rebelled against the pressure. He developed coping mechanisms, rituals, and breathing techniques that he still uses today, though the cameras never capture those quiet moments before he steps into the spotlight when he must talk himself down from the edge of panic. Gianluca Ginobili came from Roseto degli Abruzzi, a beach town on the Adriatic coast that swelled with tourists in summer and felt almost abandoned in winter. His father worked in construction, his mother as a hairdresser, and Gianluca was the baby of the family, doted upon but also expected to be practical about his future. In Italian families, particularly outside the major cities, there's often an unspoken understanding that artistic pursuits are acceptable as hobbies, but dangerous as career aspirations. Gianluca's family supported his singing, but there was always an undercurrent of concern, a worry that they were allowing their son to pursue something that would ultimately break his heart. Gianluca's voice was different from Piero's powerful baritone and Ignazio's soaring tenor. His was the voice that seemed to carry the most emotion, the one that could make listeners cry without quite understanding why. Some vocal coaches he worked with in his early teens suggested that this emotional quality, while beautiful, might be a liability in technical classical singing, where control and precision often trump raw feeling. But Gianluca never learned to separate his emotions from his voice, and ultimately, it would become one of Il Volo's defining characteristics, the element that made them feel authentic rather than like a manufactured act. When these three boys came together on Ti lascio una canzone, it wasn't love at first sight. The television show that launched them was a competition after all, and they were initially competitors, each vying for solo glory. The producers of the show, recognizing something special in the three of them, made the decision to group them together for a performance of O Sole Mio. It was meant to be a one-time collaboration, a novelty act that would fill time in one episode. What happened during their first rehearsal together has been described by each of them in various interviews over the years, though their accounts differ slightly in the details, as memories do. What remains consistent is the description of a moment when they realized their voices fit together in an unusual way. Piero describes it as feeling like coming home to a place I'd never been. Ignazio has said it was like finding two pieces of myself I didn't know were missing. Gianluca, characteristically more emotional in his recounting, has said that he felt scared by how right it felt, as if his entire life had been leading to that moment and he was only 14 years old. The Italian public's response to their first televised performance together was immediate and intense. The show's phone lines were overwhelmed with viewers calling to praise them. Music industry executives who had dismissed classical crossover as a dead genre began making inquiries. Michel Torpedine, a music producer and manager who had worked with some of Italy's biggest stars, saw in Il Volo something that hadn't existed in the Italian music landscape for decades. The possibility of making classical-influenced music genuinely popular again, not as a niche product for aging audiences, but as something that could appeal across generations. But here's what the fairy tale version of the story leaves out. The transition from teenage competition show contestants to serious recording artists was brutal. The boys were pulled out of normal school and placed in a grueling schedule of vocal training, performance coaching, media training, and recording sessions. They were still children, their bodies still changing, their voices still developing, yet they were expected to perform at a professional level night after night. The first 2 years after Ti lascio una canzone were particularly difficult. The boys lived away from their families for extended periods, shuttling between Rome, Milan, and various European cities for performances and promotional appearances. They were homesick, exhausted, and navigating the normal challenges of adolescence while under constant scrutiny. There were moments when each of them questioned whether this was what they really wanted, whether the sacrifice was worth it. Piero, who had always been the most naturally confident of the three, found himself struggling with the weight of expectation. As the baritone, he often anchored their harmonies, and he felt an enormous responsibility not to make mistakes. He developed a perfectionism that bordered on obsessive, practicing until his voice was raw, criticizing himself harshly for tiny errors that no one else even noticed. His mother, in a rare candid interview with an Italian magazine in 2012, admitted that she worried about the pressure her son was putting on himself and that she sometimes wished they had never walked through the door of that television studio. Ignazio's stage fright, rather than improving with experience, actually intensified during their first world tour. The venues got bigger, the expectations higher, and the stakes more significant. There were performances where he had to rush off stage between songs, where his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a microphone steady. His bandmates learned to cover for him, to extend musical interludes when he needed a moment, to stand closer to him on stage in a silent show of support. The press never reported on these struggles because Il Volo's management team was skilled at maintaining the image of three effortless prodigies. But the people closest to them knew how much Ignazio suffered. Gianluca faced a different challenge. As the youngest and the one who wore his emotions most openly, he became the target of intense media scrutiny about his personal life. Every rumored relationship became headline news in Italy. Every photo of him with a female friend sparked speculation. The constant invasion of privacy took a toll on his mental health, and he retreated into himself, becoming more guarded and less spontaneous than he had been as a younger teenager. Friends from his hometown who spoke to Italian journalists described how he changed during visits home, how there was a sadness in him that hadn't been there before, even as his global fame grew. The musical challenge they faced was equally daunting. Classical crossover is perhaps the most difficult genre to execute successfully. Purists from the classical world often dismiss it as watered-down opera, lacking the technical rigor and artistic integrity of true classical music. Pop audiences sometimes find it too formal, too old-fashioned, too serious. Il Volo had to walk a razor-thin line between these two worlds, creating music that honored the Italian classical tradition while remaining accessible to contemporary listeners who had grown up on completely different sounds. Their voices had to be trained to meet classical standards, which meant years of intensive technical work. They studied under some of Italy's most demanding vocal coaches, people who had trained opera stars and who didn't make allowances for their age or their pop music success. They learned breath control, diction in multiple languages, the subtle art of phrasing that makes the difference between merely hitting notes and actually moving an audience. They studied the great Italian tenors and baritones who came before them, listening to recordings for hours, trying to understand not just what these masters did, but why they did it. But they also couldn't simply imitate the past. The music industry had changed completely since the golden age of Italian popular opera. Attention spans were shorter. Radio play required songs that fit specific time formats. International audiences needed lyrics they could understand, or music that transcended language barriers entirely. Il Volo and their producers had to figure out how to honor tradition while creating something that felt relevant to the 21st century. Their breakthrough came with Il Mondo, a song originally recorded by Jimmy Fontana in 1965. Il Volo's version, released in 2010, took a piece of Italian pop history and reimagined it with their classical-influenced vocals and lush orchestration. It was traditional enough to appeal to older Italian audiences who remembered the original, but the sheer power and youth of their voices gave it a freshness that captured younger listeners. The song became a massive hit in Italy and introduced them to audiences across Europe and Latin America. What made Il Mondo work, and what has made Il Volo's best work successful, is something that's difficult to quantify but unmistakable when you hear it. There's a sincerity in their performances that cuts through any skepticism about their age or their manufactured origins. When they sing, you believe they mean it. This is partly because they do mean it, because despite all the industry machinery behind them, despite all the producers and managers and marketing strategies, they genuinely love the music they're singing. In interview after interview, conducted in Italian where they're more relaxed and revealing than in English language press, all three have spoken about their deep connection to Italian musical heritage. They described growing up hearing their grandparents play Pavarotti and Andrea Bocelli, listening to their parents sing Neapolitan folk songs, feeling that this music was in their blood even before they understood it intellectually. They speak about the responsibility they feel to keep this tradition alive, to prove that classical-influenced music isn't just for elderly audiences in opera houses, but can be vital and relevant. This sense of mission has driven them through moments when the easier path would have been to give up or to compromise, to shift toward pure pop music where the money and the mainstream success were more accessible. After their initial success in Italy and Europe, they faced years of struggle trying to break into the American market, where classical crossover had been dormant since the heyday of the three tenors in the 1990s. They played small venues to audiences who had never heard of them. They made countless morning show appearances, singing for morning television audiences who were often more interested in the novelty of three Italian teenagers than in their actual music. The American breakthrough came gradually, built on relentless touring and a grassroots following that developed among Italian-American communities and older audiences hungry for the kind of music that reminded them of another era. Their PBS specials, which might have seemed like a concession to an aging demographic, actually introduced them to millions of Americans who became devoted fans. These weren't the teenage screaming fans that pop stars cultivate, but they were loyal, passionate, and willing to buy concert tickets and albums. In 2015, Il Volo achieved something that seemed impossible. They won the Sanremo Music Festival, Italy's most prestigious music competition and one of the most important events in the European music calendar, with their song Grande Amore. For context, Sanremo isn't like American Idol or The Voice. It's a cultural institution that has launched the careers of legends and has been running since 1951. Winning Sanremo meant legitimacy, meant that they were recognized not just as a successful commercial act, but as serious artists who had earned the respect of the Italian music establishment. Grande Amore became more than just a contest winner. The song, with its soaring melody and passionate delivery, became an anthem. It topped charts across Europe, was streamed hundreds of millions of times, and established Il Volo as genuinely international stars. When they represented Italy at the Eurovision Song Contest that same year, finishing third, they brought classical crossover to an audience that typically celebrated pure pop, and they did it on their own terms, in formal wear, singing in Italian, refusing to compromise their artistic identity for broader appeal. But success at that level comes with its own complications. The pressure to maintain their position, to continue growing their audience, to stay relevant in an industry that's constantly chasing the next new thing, has been enormous. The three members of Il Volo are now in their late 20s and early 30s, no longer the teenage prodigies who could rely on the novelty of their youth. They've had to evolve as artists and as people while maintaining the core sound that made them special. This evolution hasn't always been smooth. There have been creative tensions within the group, disagreements about musical direction, moments when the strain of being locked together in this venture since adolescence has shown. In 2018, rumors circulated in the Italian press about the group potentially splitting up, about solo projects that might mark the end of Il Volo. While these rumors were officially denied, people close to the group have acknowledged that there were difficult conversations, that the three of them had to figure out how to grow as individuals while remaining committed to their collective identity. The reality is that Piero, Ignazio, and Gianluca are very different people who have been forced into an unusually intense partnership. They didn't choose each other. They were chosen for each other by television producers when they were barely teenagers. They've spent more time together than most married couples, traveling the world, sharing stages, recording albums, doing press junkets, all while navigating their own personal growth and development. That they've managed to stay together for over 15 years is remarkable, but it hasn't been without cost. Each of them has had to sacrifice aspects of a normal life. Relationships have been difficult to maintain given their touring schedule. Privacy is nearly impossible, particularly in Italy where they're recognized everywhere. They've missed family events, friends' weddings, the simple pleasure of living in one place long enough to feel truly at home. In interviews, they sometimes allude to a loneliness that comes with their lifestyle, a sense of being set apart from normal life that no amount of success can quite compensate for. The technical reality of their harmonies, the thing that makes them special, is rooted in both natural compatibility and years of training together. Voices blend well when their overtones align, when the harmonics of one voice complement rather than clash with the others. Piero's baritone provides the foundation, rich and warm and steady. Ignazio's tenor soars above, bright and powerful, capable of reaching notes that seem impossible. Gianluca's voice sits between them, the bridge that connects the two extremes, and his emotional delivery adds the human element that prevents their sound from becoming too technically perfect, too polished. But beyond the technical aspects, their harmonies work because they've learned to listen to each other with extraordinary attention. When they sing together, each one is constantly adjusting, constantly responding to the others, making minute changes in pitch and dynamics that keep them locked together. This level of musical communication can't be taught. It develops over years of singing together, of learning each other's tendencies and habits, of developing an almost telepathic connection on stage. Watch them perform live, and you'll notice the glances they exchange, the subtle nods, the way they lean toward each other on certain phrases. These aren't staged movements choreographed by a director. They're the natural physical manifestation of three musicians who have become so attuned to each other that they move as one organism. In a world where most pop music is recorded in pieces, with vocals layered track by track and perfected through technology, Il Volo's insistence on singing together, on recording their vocals simultaneously so they can feed off each other's energy, is increasingly rare. Their touring schedule over the years has been punishing. More than 200 shows in some years, crisscrossing continents, performing in venues ranging from intimate theatres to massive outdoor amphitheatres. Each performance requires the same level of excellence, the same vocal power, whether they're singing for 500 people or 15,000. There's no lip syncing, no backing tracks to hide behind. Every note is live, every harmony exposed, and the pressure of that level of consistent excellence has taken a physical toll. Vocal health has been a constant concern. They've all dealt with nodes, strain, and exhaustion at various points. They work with vocal coaches and laryngologists, follow strict regimens before performances, avoid certain foods and activities that might affect their voices. When one of them is struggling vocally, the others have to compensate, adjusting their parts to support the person who's compromised. This mutual support system has kept them going through tours that might have broken individual performers. The financial reality of their success is also more complicated than it might appear from the outside. While they've sold millions of albums and tickets, they're part of a complex business structure involving managers, producers, record labels, and various other entities that all take their share. The boys who came from modest backgrounds in small Italian towns have certainly achieved financial security their families never knew, but they're not living the ostentatious lifestyle that some imagine for international music stars. They've been relatively careful with their money, aware that careers in the music industry can be short-lived, that vocal instruments can fail, that audiences can move on to the next thing. What sustains them, what has allowed them to continue for over 15 years, is a genuine love for what they do and a shared sense of purpose. In their best moments, when the harmonies lock in perfectly and they feel the audience responding, when everything comes together in that mysterious way that only happens in live performance, they experience something transcendent. Music at that level isn't just entertainment. It's a form of communion, a way of touching something larger than themselves. They've become ambassadors for Italian culture, carrying their country's musical heritage to audiences who might never otherwise encounter it. In arenas across Latin America, they've introduced millions to the beauty of Italian classical song. In concert halls across the United States, they've given aging Italian Americans a connection to the culture of their ancestors. In Asia, where they've built a substantial following, they've proven that Italian musical tradition can resonate across vast cultural divides. But they've also had to confront the limitations of their chosen path. Classical crossover will never be the coolest genre. They'll never be the artists that critics fall over themselves to praise. Their audience skews older, which means they're often dismissed by the music industry's youth-obsessed machinery. They've made peace with this, understanding that the work they do matters to the people who connect with it, even if it doesn't dominate the cultural conversation. As they've matured, both as vocalists and as people, their interpretations of songs have deepened. The emotional truth they bring to their performances now comes from lived experience, not just from natural talent and technical training. They've experienced love and heartbreak, success and disappointment, joy and loss. All of that pours into their music, making their recent work richer and more nuanced than what they produced as teenagers, even if the teenage versions got more attention for the sheer novelty of youth. The untold truth behind Il Volo's perfect harmonies isn't a single revelation, but a tapestry of human stories. It's the truth that perfection is an illusion, that what sounds effortless is actually the product of relentless work and sometimes painful sacrifice. It's the truth that these three men have given up enormous pieces of their lives to preserve and propagate a musical tradition that was dying. It's the truth that behind the glamour and the international fame, they remain in many ways the boys from Naro, Marsala, and Rosetto degli Abruzzi, carrying the weight of their origins and their responsibility. Their story is about the cost of being chosen, about what happens when exceptional talent emerges from ordinary circumstances, about the bargain that gets struck when you agree to give your gift to the world. They've brought beauty and joy to millions of people, but they've done it by surrendering the privacy and autonomy that most people take for granted. They've achieved dreams that seemed impossible from where they started, but they've had to grow up in public, make their mistakes under scrutiny, and navigate adult life while still being defined by decisions they made as children. The Harmonies will continue as long as their voices hold, as long as their commitment to each other and to their mission remains strong. But the human beings creating those harmonies will continue to evolve, to struggle, to search for meaning and satisfaction beyond the applause. The untold truth is that they're both more and less than what they appear on stage, more complex, more vulnerable, more human, and also more dedicated, more disciplined, and more gifted than most people will ever fully comprehend. In their voices, ancient and modern, classical and contemporary, Italian and universal, they carry forward something precious, and they do it knowing that it might not be enough, that the world might forget them, but singing anyway because some things are worth preserving, even without guarantees of permanence or recognition.